Hey, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to Beekeeping for Newbies. Thank you so very much for taking the time to listen. I do appreciate you. As always, feel free to reach out, Jeff at beekeepingfornewbies.com. That's NEWBEES.com. Join us in the Discord room. There is a link from the Beekeeping for Newbies homepage at the very top. And you can also check us out on YouTube. It's just at Beekeeping for Newbies. Just be sure to use the right spelling, NEWBEES. Well, today we've got an exciting guest teed up for you. As I mentioned a couple of times in some other episodes and in the Discord room, I made a trip cross country with my daughter to drop her off for an internship. Went through a couple of different places on the way, one of them being Missouri. So I did the in the news segments with all the states that we touched along that journey, and I came across Hives KC. So Hives is an organization that was established to place honeybees and beehives on vacant lots throughout the Kansas City metropolitan area. I didn't know anything about this, but I thought it sounded pretty cool. It reminded me of Bees in the D up there in Detroit from when we had our discussion with Brian last year. And I thought, hey, let's reach out and see if they'd like to have a discussion with us so we can learn more. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Marion Pierson with Hives. Dr. Pierson, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. We've had a lot of crazy things going on all over the country with the weather. So I first wanted to ask you, are you folks being impacted at all by these tornadoes out there?
You know, a lot of the country has definitely been hit, but we had some strong ones, but nothing too intense. And it is a gorgeous 78-degree morning here in Kansas City, Missouri, and we're just looking forward to a great day.
Nice. Okay, that's what I like to hear. So I do want to share one thing with you that I did not pre-warn you about. But as you know, I mentioned previously that I had some dialogue with Charlotte Wiggins, and I did name drop you to her. And she had nothing but great things to say about you and said, please tell Dr. Pierson I said hello. So hello from Charlotte.
Oh, she's amazing. Hello, Charlotte. And make sure you tell her I said hello. I'll need to drop her text today.
There you go. Absolutely. Well, so, if you would, and I know that we're here and we're going to talk a little bit about Hives today, but before we get into that, if you would take as much time as you like, and if you wouldn't mind giving us a little bit of background on you and how you got where you are so that we can get to know you a little bit.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, I am truly a Kansas City born and raised, was raised right here in the middle of the city. I grew up hiking and enjoying nature, but my career path took me into the field of medicine, and currently I am a full-time practicing pediatrician and enjoy that immensely. But a few years ago, I am admittedly, and I tell everyone the same thing, I admittedly am addicted to honey, and I have absolutely loved honey since I was a kid. And when I started learning more about really threats to pollinators and honeybees specifically, I was really intrigued, and, I felt the weight of that. I don't know why I felt it so personally, but I said, you know what, I'm going to go into beekeeping so I can get even more involved in what I love, which was honey, but also what needs a little bit of extra love, in my opinion, or what needed a little bit extra love, which was pollinator conservation and honeybees specifically. So anyway, I decided that I was going to go into beekeeping, and my husband truly laughed at me and said, "You're going to do what?" He said, "You're scared of bugs. You're not going to become a beekeeper." And I said, I know, but I am. So that was really the start of it all. In fact, he was the one who found an article about a young couple in the middle of Detroit, Tim Jackson and Nicole Lindsay, who started Detroit Hives. And they were doing something that I thought was absolutely fascinating. I'd never heard of that sort of endeavor before. And they were turning vacant lots into honeybee farms and teaching people about bee conservation. And I was truly riveted. And that's how it got started.
Nice. Okay. Well, so that was one of the questions that I had. I think that when we had talked briefly before and we had a discussion around the medical field, and I wasn't sure if you were still practicing full time, but we'd covered the fact that I used to be a paramedic at one point in time, and I think you had mentioned there's a lot of people in the medical community that seem to be, interested in bees. And I think it comes into that kind of inquisitive mindset and that desire to kind of better understand life that might be a driver for that.
Yes. In fact, our organization's co-founder, Brian Reeves, is in the pharmaceutical sales business. And Brian and I met, honestly, at my first beekeeping sort of informational session. And we had gone to a seminar. And afterwards, I was like, I've got this crazy idea, and I don't know anything about beekeeping. This is my first beekeeping class. And Brian said, I've been beekeeping in my backyard for years, and that sounds amazing, and I'll join you. And I didn't even know that he was medical at that point. And then, of course, we found out that, indeed, we both had this interest. And I think it really is the scientific curiosity, the observational skills that a lot of medical people use in their everyday professional life that really do translate to helpful skill sets when you're doing things like beekeeping, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think that one thing that I thoroughly enjoy about beekeeping is the fact that it kind of can span all types of, I would say, mental ability. You can have people that are incredibly bright and very scientific, and they can get down into the weeds and talk about the various glands and how they do all of these things within the anatomy and physiology of the bees themselves. Whereas you can just have a regular person who's just like, I just like the honey and like hanging out with the bees. You don't have to be a PhD or, in the medical field or an entomologist or whatever to have that same level of joy.
Absolutely. And you definitely don't have to be really comfortable even with insects sometimes. Sometimes just being curious is enough to really get intensely into beekeeping, which is, again, beekeeping is just fun to me. So there's so many drivers for why people would get into it. And that's where the invitation for me comes in. The invitation to this sort of activity, this sort of work is open to everybody, every age and every skill set. In fact, we have people that come out that are 7 and some that are 87. So every skill set, every walk of life. And again, that's where the invitation to conservation truly in general is open to everyone.
So much fun. So, I was about to say, where else can you get something that is as therapeutic, as low of a cost? But really, there is a little bit of a cost involved in getting involved. But, as a regular common person, it's very easy to get in with a group or get in with a club or get in with someone who has hives to kind of help show you around.
Absolutely. That's one of the best things about entering this work as well. I came from, a pretty, I'm not going to call it rigid, but maybe in some ways a bit rigid field, the medical field. And sometimes people can be intensely into their work, and sometimes that doesn't always feel as welcoming. When I began to be involved with the beekeeping community truly around the state of Missouri, but also the beekeepers I've met from across the country, the community of beekeepers are just incredible, just an incredibly welcoming bunch. If anybody needs help, there's 10 people who are willing to say, hey, I've had this experience, or hey, have you ever thought about that? It just is such a true community of people that I love it. That is also a big driver for me, just being involved in a community of people that seem to want to work together at every opportunity they can.
I could not agree with you more. That was one thing, whenever you do anything public, just as you in your role, I'm sure, and as me and mine, whenever you're doing something public, you're opening yourself up to scrutiny. And I just always thought, geez, do I want to have to put up with some of these people, especially the ones that hide online, say their negative things? But I'll tell you, every now and then you have that person that decides they're going to say something. You just kind of ignore them. Okay, thank you. Have a great day. But overwhelmingly, people get so excited, especially when you have a person who is new and then they become excited, which that's why we kind of have that Discord room that we run where I think we've got about 250, 260 people in there. And there's always some chitter chatter going back and forth. And it's just great to see the new folks and the way they communicate, and watching someone who comes in and knows nothing. You'll see them post a message, I don't really know anything, I'm completely new. And then 2 months later, they're going, oh, this is what you got to do, So that's great to see that growth.
For sure. I feel like that is definitely me all the time. I don't know anything. When I put it out there, people are truly willing to help. So again, I think going into this also for me was an attempt to demonstrate to others that you don't have to be limited to only doing things that you're good at. I mean, that resonates with me. I try to push myself outside of my comfort zone. I think I have done pretty well over these past several decades at practicing the art of medicine. But here's a space that I came to truly with zero knowledge, and it has been fun to learn. And so I'm encouraging everyone else. Here's my effort at doing something that I'm definitely not good at. Here's my effort at failing publicly, at having to reroute my course publicly in front of everyone. And just, again, an invitation that if I can do this, anybody can do whatever it is they want to do, right? Whatever they endeavor to do, they can do.
That's great. It takes a special person, I think, to do that, because a lot of people, nobody likes criticism. Nobody wants anybody to point fingers and say you're wrong, you're bad, or whatever it might be. And being able to step out like that, I think that speaks highly to your character. When we talk about Mo Hives and kind of the vision, and well, maybe if you wouldn't mind, if you could take a minute and just kind of talk us through what Mo Hives really is, what the vision is, how you execute some of the things that are kind of the highlights of the organization.
Great. Thank you. So Mo Hives is an organization, and our whole mission is to help urban residents recognize their role in establishing and maintaining and preserving healthy pollinator habitat right in the middle of the city. So we do our work primarily on vacant lots in the inner city of Kansas City. We don't own any property. The properties where we place our hives or create urban apiaries are generally owned by someone else. In fact, our first apiary was owned by a large nonprofit, and they had some vacant lots that they were unfortunately experiencing a lot of dumping on, which happens in most big cities where there are vacant spaces. They are magnets, it seems, for activities that aren't necessarily beneficial to the neighbors or the community. So what we did was we asked them, would it be okay if we created an apiary here? We'll clean up the lots, we'll keep them mowed and maintained in exchange for being able to place our hives here. And we partnered with the organization and the neighborhood and plopped down our first hives. And so from there, others approached us and said, we have a vacant lot here or there. And now we have 5 different vacant lot or vacant land sites in the Kansas City, Missouri metro area where we place hives there. And then we teach, again, urban residents about how they can help. They don't need to necessarily become beekeepers, but can people help by planting a little bit more in the way of natives around their yards? Can people help by helping us control the invasive species that take over spaces where the native plants and trees and shrubs could ordinarily grow? Can residents help us by not spraying as much pesticide or herbicide in their lawns? And so just sharing with the community ways that they can help short of becoming beekeepers. And then also if people want to become beekeepers, we definitely allow them to have experiential learnings where on our apiary, we have enough equipment for the community to come in and volunteer on the weekends, and we host weekend hours. And so we have, like I said, 5 sites around the Kansas City metro. But part of our bigger vision was to move outside of just the city of Kansas City and the metropolitan area here. But we also now have hives on vacant property in other big cities around Missouri, in Springfield and St. Louis. And we even have hives at the governor's mansion in Jefferson City, which is our state capital. So one of the things that we hope to do is to get as many people across the state to recognize where the pollinators fit in to our overall health of our ecosystem, but certainly even more critically, how they're involved in our food system. Missouri has a large agricultural focus to our state, and dependent and interwoven into the agricultural health of our state is the health of the pollinators. We really need the pollinators to have a healthy food network. And urban residents are sometimes really struggling with food deserts and food scarcity and food security. So really helping the entirety of our communities across the state and certainly across the country to recognize that you can't have healthy food systems if you don't have healthy pollinator systems. And so putting that in front of people has been a goal of ours as well. So managing vacant lots, the community development aspect of that, the food security aspect of that, those are all things that we hope to touch on with our work here at Hive.
No, that's exciting. So as you're talking, I'm making all these notes because there's so many areas that I think topics of discussion that could be branched off from there. And, one of the things that I think about is, urban areas tend to be hit harder. I think you see things that if they're not going well, you hear about it. If things are going well, maybe you hear about it. But generally speaking, if things aren't going the way the general population expects them to, you always hear about it in the urban areas. And when I think about it, a lot of times there's things where there used to be a couple of rec centers or a pool, and some of these things are closing down and people don't have as many things to do. What I see with this is a great conversation starter. It's a great thing that can engage young people. And I mean, obviously, I think of myself as 12, 13, 14 years old, and someone says, no, we're going to go into these things and you can open them up and there's all these things that are going to sting you. I can see where that would be a little bit scary, but I think it's just a great opportunity, like you mentioned, about getting the community and getting some of the younger folks involved. And you can do whatever you want with it, whether it's just a hobby, or some of them might say, hey, I'm going to start my own urban beekeeping business, or I'm going to, it's just more opportunity to engage.
Absolutely. And at Hives, we share with people that we really frame our work around what we have named our Hive 5. And our Hive 5 really frames why we do what we do. And the first is certainly bee conservation. Just pollinators are threatened. There are some things that we can do as humans to help. And what are those things? That's a big conversation that we like to have. But certainly beautification. When you talk about urban blighted areas, looking at dumped on vacant lots, that's mentally draining for families, and that it's burdensome. There's a real mental health burden around looking at debris, trash, and blight. So beautification has certainly been an important part of why we do our work. Food security, certainly, as we talked about, helping people to recognize that, yes, bees produce a type of food, honey, but they are impactful in our food systems, and truly 1 in every 3 bites of food needs pollinator. And I know on the Beekeeping podcast, you go over that all the time, but that needs to be in front of a lot of our population, because not enough people recognize that we need insects and pollinators to have a healthy food system. And then STEM careers. Young people need to recognize that entomology or bug science, certainly botany and horticulture, those are all scientific fields, environmental engineering, scientific fields that we need young people to really gravitate towards if we're going to continue to have a bright future for our environment. And then entrepreneurism, the beekeeping industry, and not just beekeeping in the sense of going into honeybee hives, but the beekeeping industry in the sense of having pollinator services hired out, or making the beekeeping equipment, or breeding queen bees and selling bee packages. That's an industry that's worth over $15 billion in the U.S. And the invitation to more people, extending that invitation to more people and showing them that there's truly an entrepreneurial opportunity for people here is that fifth piece that we really try to drive home as well.
As you were talking, and you hit the nail on the head, I think, with some of the mental health aspects of living in a community like that, because I think that I see this as a great, cooperative partnership. It's a mutually beneficial relationship where these vacant lot owners are getting some cleanup help, and you all are able to use the property and use the land for the beekeeping. But, I have family, my wife's family is all through the north of Detroit area and through the rest of the state. And I've been downtown, particularly, it's been a few years, but I remember probably 1 out of every 4 or 5 houses was occupied in some areas. It's just devastated up there. And I think to myself that I'm fortunate enough to be in a nice neighborhood, and you drive down the road and everybody's grass is cut and everything looks good. But imagine that you wake up every day, you walk outside, your neighbor to the left isn't there, your neighbor to the right isn't there, the grass is tall, things look like junk. you look and you will feel by what you surround yourself with. If you surround yourself with positive energy, a lot of, happiness, bright colors, things are going to be better for you than someone who sits around, in an area that's just, I don't want to say it's a war zone, but it's not that far off, I would say.
So there is an impact, and there's plenty of studies, and there are people researching really the degree to which what we see in our environment affects our mental health, and then how our mental health then affects our physical health. So certainly as a physician, I see things that can change for the better, that can affect us environmentally, mentally, and then physically. What a way to be impactful in that sense. So it's not a prescription and a medication, a pharmaceutical, but it's a change to the environment, which can benefit us all, but certainly can benefit each individual. So it's I feel like another way I'm practicing medicine, right? By changing the environment.
No, absolutely. And I think that's great. I mean, I'm not being, an MD and actively practicing doctor myself, but I have a vision in my mind, which may or may not be accurate, but you have standards of care. There's certain things that are expected where if you see this, then you're expected to prescribe that. And, I think a lot of modern day kind of medicine, I don't want to say modern day medicine, I would say doctors who are more outside the box, it seems to me that more and more of them seem to be exploring other things like, hey, have you thought about something that's non-medicinal? Hey, maybe this activity, or maybe this particular type of an herb, something that's not as mainstream. But I feel like, and again, outsider looking in, like there may be a lot of pressure from people up above to say, hey, if we see this is what we have to prescribe, because if we don't, we're opening ourselves up to a lawsuit. I don't know if that's something that you see, or if that's an accurate assessment from my end.
Well, I do think that more and more doctors are doing things like prescribing outdoor time. The outdoor prescriptions are becoming more and more popular, where physicians are literally telling people, go outside. It will help your blood pressure. Go outside. It will help your mental state. More and more physicians are prescribing fruits and vegetables. And so, again, I think the art and science of medicine collide in some really interesting ways. And for sure, when we can improve our air and our water quality by taking an active interest in conservation, we're all going to be healthier. We're so proud at Hive to be sponsored by the Missouri Department of Conservation as community partners, because we thought we were doing one thing and we didn't recognize how much we were doing for all these other things in the environment. And so I think partnering with groups that can see and recognize the fact that every piece impacts another piece is just helpful, again, in a lot of different ways that I didn't even appreciate initially.
Sure, absolutely. So you mentioned the Missouri Department of Conservation, but are there other maybe corporate sponsorships and other entities within, say, maybe the city limits, or even across the country that may be involved in sponsorship, providing support to you? Like, how do you see those relationships today? How do you see them evolving, and what significant role do they play within the organization?
Yes, thank you. So Missouri Department of Conservation is our primary sponsor, and they are really connected to us because they recognize that a lot of work across the state of Missouri in conservation had been done very remote from the city centers of our state. And so a lot of conservation was happening in more rural areas where the main population of the state, they weren't seeing that work. But the best thing to do is to really have urban dwellers recognize that they too are a part of conservation. And so MDC getting involved in really a middle of the city, middle of urban center conservation work, the message that conservation is work that we can all do together across the state of Missouri, certainly, but certainly across the country. One of the big things is we are partnered with Lincoln University, which is one of the local universities in Missouri. It's 2 hours from Kansas City, but it is a historically Black college university, and it is an agricultural university. And so one of the things we do is we try to, as part of that STEM exposure, we try to expose young people to the fact that here's a there's a local university, which is 2 hours from this metropolitan area, where you can truly study this and establish yourself in this career with the opportunity to go on beyond curiosity and hobby into higher learning about these sort of environmental fields. And so our partnerships, again, are with local residents, universities, private funders, governmental funders, all of the above. And I think that's been our sweet spot. But we have other partnerships that sometimes are not as obvious. We have our first private foundation was a Shoemaker Family Foundation, and they're involved in a lot of funding for social justice. And so when we look at social justice efforts, those are efforts that would help communities that might bear a larger burden when it comes to environmental pollution. So some more of landfills and abandoned tire centers. Those are located in some areas that, different groups that don't necessarily have as strong a political voice might be located. There's a lot of abandoned property and undermanaged property in some of the urban areas. And so how can we bring more justice to and environmental justice to centers that may be financially struggling? So again, an organization like that who wishes to support causes or organizations that would really rally around those kind of efforts, they've been able to support, and they've done that well for us. We also partner with a literacy organization, Lead to Read, which is another organization that people say, well, why are you involved in a literacy campaign? But every time we invite people to learn about something new, sometimes learning is going to involve reading, right? And so we don't only learn through reading, but certainly being literate and having an increased level of literacy is going to help everyone be better at pulling in knowledge that they need to around new things like beekeeping and this type of science and this type of STEM. So just helping little kids and even older adults be more curious about literacy and maybe opening their interest up through beekeeping and is an interesting place that we have been able to connect. We even have a little free library that is stocked with pollinator-focused books on our main apiary. So kids from the neighborhood come in and we say, hey, this is the bee farm, this is the apiary, but also we've got a lot of books about it. And literally they will say, can you read me this book? And so we read to little kids that come by in the neighborhood from the neighborhood. So that's a lot of fun and surprising. We partner with the Missouri Department of Agriculture because, again, honey is an agricultural crop, and we need healthy pollinators to have healthy agriculture across our state. And so they have funded us in some really incredible ways. We partner with the National Wildlife Federation. In fact, our main apiary hosts a Garden for Wildlife, which is part of the National Wildlife Federation's efforts to get the public interested in hosting tiny spots for wildlife conservation. And they're really simple to do and fun to have your tiny Garden for Wildlife on the National Wildlife Federation map. So that's phenomenal and super fun. We partner with a lot of local volunteer agencies. I'm a member of another group, the Links Incorporated, and they are a group of African-American women from across the globe, really, that do volunteer projects, and they help us maintain our National Wildlife Federation Garden for Wildlife. So we just have lots of partnerships, both public, private, governmental, individuals, that really help encourage us in the work we're doing. We are not the best beekeepers in the world because we're new, and we are okay with that. But with that newness, again, we hope that we're demonstrating the willingness to partner with whoever wants to join in this work and our willingness to learn. And I think that resonates with people.
I absolutely love it. It really resonated with me with the reading and the books. I just thought, what a great idea, right? Kids are already there anyway. And as a little kid, a lot of people don't want to suit them up. They're like, oh, they're too little, they're too young. But having them be able to get engaged and be involved, and that's really exciting. So if you don't mind, can we shift over a little bit to, you mentioned the 5 sites, and you mentioned about some of the, obviously there's, beehives at the sites. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe, roughly how many hives there are across the sites? One thing that comes to mind with that as well is, let's say I'm in the neighborhood. I've heard of a lot of the urban gardens where a family gets a little space where they can kind of carve out for themselves. Is it the same type of thing where, hey, you've already vetted me, I kind of know what I'm doing. I'm allowed as a resident, can I come through and I can do inspections on some hives? Or, what are some of the rules around that and how they engage as well?
Oh, yes. So we have about 30 hives across the state. And what we do is every Sunday from 9 to 11 at our main Wabash apiary, we invite the public to come in, and people can volunteer to do anything for those 2 hours. Some people say, well, I'm not going to interact with the bees, but I will help you cut down some invasives, or I will help you plant some native plants, or I would like to clean some beekeeping equipment. Or they say, no, I would like to suit up. So they're invited to suit up with us. We don't have opportunities for people to just go in and take care of the hives. But with those 5 sites, if people decide, what, I do have some free time, and we do have some experienced beekeepers that'll say, what, I do have some free time in my schedule. I'd like to help you guys do some inspections. We certainly ask our beekeeping community to help out with advice. And we just learned how to do OA treatments from Bob Burns, another beekeeper who's been beekeeping for 40 plus years. And he taught us and our team that whole skill. So we pull in experts to volunteer with us. We pull in the public to volunteer with us. So that's really the model we've used. We are beginning even an outreach team across the state. So in the cities where we have hives outside of Kansas City, we've generally just been driving to those sites, but we've connected with the beekeeping community enough over the past couple of years that beekeepers are like, what, I live in the city. You don't have to drive here. I will do the inspections and can connect with the team, and can we form that partnership that way? So we're exploring lots of ways to continue to make sure our hives are managed well, and that we're connected to the beekeeping communities in all the cities that we touch across the state.
Yeah, and I can see kind of both sides to that, right? Part of me was thinking, well, how cool would it be if I'm a neighbor, I live in this area, and I can just run down there and do an inspection? But then on the flip side to that, right, somebody's got to be responsible. The person has a allergic reaction, anaphylactic response for some reason. Next thing you know, you're in a bit of a liability situation. And also, right, if they're fairly new, you want them to be supervised so that they're doing things right. You don't want them to develop all the bad habits that I have, so...
Well, again, we're all learning, but you're right. We have to work together as a team and figuring out what those outreach teams look like. That's definitely part of our growth.
Well, let me ask you if you could name, and feel free to name as many as you like, but when you see what you have today and what you have going on and all the people who are active and they're engaged and they're contributing in all the ways that they can, where do you see gaps? If there's somebody who's listening and they're from the Kansas City area and they're thinking, well, this sounds kind of neat, I'm sure they've got it all covered. Where do you see gaps where if people can step up that you could really use a little extra help out there?
Well, as we mentioned before, thank you for the question. As we mentioned before, I do this, and Brian, my co-founder, he does this on a voluntary basis on the side of our full-time jobs. And so we are not full-time beekeepers, so we could always use help organizing our beekeeping, just even supplies. Sometimes you're like, hey, I'm going to pop a new deep on that hive. I'm going to add a super. You have to pull out all your, drawn comb, and you have to make sure you've got your equipment that's repaired. And so even just little help like that helps an organization like ours. Beekeepers do say, I've got a couple hours during the week. There are some, beekeepers that are retired from their jobs, hanging out and really working with us for a couple days or even a couple hours is incredibly helpful. And beekeepers do that. So that's where we could use the help, because we just need extra hands. Like I said, we love being in all these areas, but we also need help, and we're still new. And so advice is always welcome.
Well, so that's a great point. I didn't ask earlier, how long has Hives been around? And you may have mentioned it. I may have completely missed it.
Well, honestly and truly, we broke ground in the spring of 2020. So it's right at 4 years. And that's when I started beekeeping, was the spring of 2020. Like I said, Brian has been beekeeping for probably closer to 9 or 10 years, but it's just been 4.
Okay. Okay. Well, I promise you, next time I drive through Kansas City, I will stop by and I'll contribute in some way, and I will stop by and introduce myself. I'm a little embarrassed to admit this here because I'm 50 years old and I drove through Kansas City. I think I mentioned it to you with my daughter on the way to Wyoming, like last week or the week before. And I really had no understanding of the dynamic of Kansas City and the relationship to Kansas and Missouri. I didn't get the whole thing, and I'm still a little bit embarrassed about that. But I promise you, I will stop by next time I'm in the area.
It's a little confusing to have a city named Kansas City, and it's not in Kansas, right?
Yes, exactly. So as we kind of, I guess, maybe get towards the end here and maybe wrapping things up, I know you had mentioned before that there were folks up in Detroit Hives, and you mentioned that I think that was how you kind of got things started, and you reached out to them and say, hey, what are you doing here? How are you doing things? If you were to start all over again, do you feel like you would still use kind of the model that they put in place? Or, I know like when I tend to do things, I get advice from a lot of other people and then I kind of make my own thing. And would you say that the model they had was great to kick things off and then you just had to kind of customize it for your area? Because what I'm thinking now is there's got to be somebody somewhere in an urban area here throughout the world, really, who might say, hey, why can't we do this? So do you feel like the model that you went off of was a good one? And, what would you change? What would you do differently?
Yes, thank you. Detroit Hives really was so inspirational in that they came with their story and were just honest and open and vulnerable and inexperienced. And that really resonated with me. Honesty, openness, vulnerability, and inexperience in this work. So I think the blueprint that they gave us was absolutely what we needed. I had not seen this happening in an urban area. I hadn't even heard of anything like it. And I think what we needed was to have a general framework, which their model provided. And you're right, we had to customize it. What they did and how they did it didn't work exactly for us. And we did need to tweak some things. So I think the biggest thing that I would say is maybe I should, I laugh because I'm like, maybe I should have gone slower. But I think that's part of it. I think part of it is just jumping right in. I think if I had thought about it for too long, I may not have done it because it can be intimidating. It's a lot to think about. One of the really interesting things was that we absolutely, the spring of 2020, as everyone knows, was the start of a global pandemic. And when we were planning in the winter of 2019, we did not see coronavirus and COVID spreading across the globe. We didn't see that coming. And then in the spring of 2020, when literally the world shut down, and I don't know how it was where you are, but they were telling people no one but, critical personnel needs to be out at work. People need to stay at home. I mean, literally people were being told to stay indoors. We considered not breaking ground at all. We were like, well, should we even do this? And I think if there is any positive thing that came out of that horrific global pandemic experience, one of the things that came out of it was the fact that we said, yes, we're going to go ahead. This is an outdoor activity where we can distance ourselves if that's what the public health officials are calling for is physical distance. We can do this outdoors, yet in community with others. And it really helped me personally, and I hope it helped others, to still stay connected as a community, because we could have all stayed shut up in our homes and isolated from one another, and that has its own mental and physical toll for sure. But being able to be in community and do a collective work with people was amazing. And so I wouldn't have changed that, but maybe I would have slowed down and gone slower, and I don't know if that would have been a good thing or not. But
so I think that, you touched on a point that I think is just, I hadn't even thought about this either. When you mentioned it, I thought, okay, it started during COVID, no big deal, right? But I think the timing of that, like you mentioned, was absolutely essential. I mean, so many people were just grabbing their hair and pulling, like, I've got to do something. I'm going, cabin fever, and everybody was just, I think so. That may have really been an amazing outlet for a lot of people. I think the timing may have been pretty good for you there.
I think so. We saw across the country, national park attendance was up because people wanted to be outside and they wanted to do something. And, connecting with nature is really grounding in general, even in the best of times. And certainly when we're faced with such a physical burden, when people were truly physically ill, when we're faced with such a mental health burden, people were just, their lives were entirely disrupted. So people were looking for something to do. So I think, again, if anything positive could come out of that terrible situation, one of the things was people wanted to do something to be helpful, and they joined in, they partnered up, and it truly, truly helped us, I think.
Definitely, without a doubt. Now, I do have one quick go back. I wanted to just ask, when you're working with these vacant lots and you're dealing with the landowners and the people within the community, do you see you're getting good support or any challenges with dealing at the local level with local government and compliance with various ordinances and things like that? Do you feel like that they've supported you, or are there some challenges that you see with that?
Well, we have been intentional about connecting with the neighborhood, and the neighborhood where we started our first apiary is called the Blue Hills neighborhood. And we connected with their president and their leadership before we put one hive down, because we knew that unless we connected with community, there could be more problems than would be helpful. So that was one of the first things, was to make sure that the residents and the neighbors where we were planning on locating were involved. And that has been incredibly helpful, because once you get neighborhood support, then you get your local council person support because the neighborhood really wants it. And then you get your city support. And so starting at the neighborhood level has been critical in getting, more community support. And I say this, and one day it won't be true, but there hasn't been one person that we've asked to join in and help in whatever way we thought we might need some help. There hasn't been one person that's just said no. I mean, and that's a true statistic. Again, and maybe one day it won't be true, but people say yes to this because it does bring community together, whether it be, okay, we're going to, do a cleanup here. That's bringing community together. Or we're truly going to have a beekeeping workshop one day. And so that's bringing community together. So people say yes, people want to get involved. And yes, there are ordinances we have to consider. And yes, there are things that we, need to correct or do differently. But the community support has been profound. It has been encouraging, and it has been really a lifeline to keep us going.
And I think that a lot of times it's really easy for anyone, to have a vision of something, and you're going through that analysis and you're boom, 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 and you kind of forget some of the basic, simple things. And like you just mentioned, right, having that local connection and knocking on the door, the people who are maybe next door to that lot and saying, hi, how you doing? We had this crazy idea. What do you think? Versus going straight to the city council, because then city council says, yeah, it's no problem. Do whatever you want to do. And then the next door neighbor walks up and says, excuse me, I'd kind of like a little bit of a say in this.
Right, for sure. And that's been great. We have wonderful neighbors in the neighborhood immediately next to our apiary, and we involve them in every way we can, from them truly speaking up and coming into the hives to, there are neighbors who are like, I saw someone and I thought they were going to open the gate, but we told them don't open the gate. So, they're looking out for the property. That's been an incredible piece to this too, really getting to know people on a deeper level. People are so curious and so helpful. So it's been a lot of fun.
Well, beehives are definitely a great conversation starter. I don't think I've ever either had them to where someone can see them, or a sticker somewhere, or someone sees a picture where it doesn't start a conversation. And of course, the question everybody always says, do you get a lot of honey? Do you get a lot of honey? What can I do to get some honey? Everybody wants the honey money. So
right.
Well, Dr. Pierson, thank you so very much for taking the time today to tell us all about yourself, all about MoHives. I'm excited about it. Like I said, I'm definitely going to plan on stopping by next time I'm in the area. And if you all ever need a hand and there's anything I can do, please don't hesitate to reach out. If there's a message or information that needs to be disseminated, feel free to use me in any way that you need to. And feel free to stay in touch if you'd like to come back and visit with us again. We'd always love to have you back and tell us some more updates and keep us in the loop as to what's going on out there.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you allowing your listeners to learn more about us. And if you'll have me back, we will definitely love to come back. I would definitely love to come back and just talk more about any updates that we have. There's always so much exciting stuff going on. Your listeners are just so lucky to have this podcast. I'll just say that.
Thank you so very much. I definitely appreciate it. And we will look forward to catching up with you again here in the near future. We'll say maybe within the next 6 months. How about that? We'll put a target before Christmas time.
All right, let's put a target to get together before Christmas time.
That sounds like a great plan. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Marion Pierson, Hives KC, thank you very much. All right, everybody. Well, that wraps it up. I hope you enjoyed our discussion today. There were several things that Dr. Pierson said that really resonated with me, just about kind of how you go about things in your day-to-day life, like how you tackle tough things, getting out there, just get out there and do it, not being afraid to fail, trying to find a way to get a little bit comfortable being uncomfortable. So I think there's a lot of good just life lessons in general to take away from that, but thoroughly enjoyed the discussion. Well, everybody, that is going to wrap it up for this episode. As always, feel free to join us over in the Discord room. Reach out, Jeff at beekeepingfornewbies.com. And in the meantime, be kind to one another, and I'll look forward to talking to you real soon. Take care.